Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into two totally different ways of looking at the world. And these aren't just abstract ideas, think of them more like active maps for getting through life. You know, maps that show you where the dangers are, where the treasure's buried, and where you're ultimately headed. So let's jump right in.
You know, this is a question we all have to face at some point. Life throws tragedy and, frankly, some pretty awful stuff our way. And to get through it all, you need some kind of framework. A story. A story that tells you where you stand, what you're supposed to do, and where all this is going. Because without that story, we're just lost.
So, how do we actually build these frameworks for ourselves? Well, our sources suggest we do it with stories. We use them to build what you could call maps of meaning. Today, what we're going to do is lay out two of these maps right next to each other. They come from completely different starting points and, as you'll see, they lead to two wildly different understandings of our world and our role in it.
All right, so let's dig into our first map. This one, it charts the main struggle of life as something that happens inside of us. It says the great adventure isn't fighting some enemy out there, but it's happening right here, within you and me, on that border between what we know and what we don't.
So this first map, it starts with a really basic idea, that the reality we live in is made of two fundamental things. First, there's order. That's the world we get, right? Our society, our routines, our rules, it's what feels safe. And then there's chaos. That's everything else, the unknown. It's where you find both terrifying monsters and incredible treasures. And we're always standing with a foot in both worlds.
And believe it or not, this whole dynamic goes back a long, long way. The source actually points to lobsters to make this point. It's fascinating. Their brain chemistry, even the way they hold themselves, it physically changes depending on whether they win or lose a fight. This shows that things like confidence and our sense of place in the world, well, it's baked into our biology from ancient times. So from this point of view, standing up straight isn't just about posture. It's a statement about who you are psychologically and spiritually.
So if you're standing between order and chaos, how do you actually navigate it? Well, this map gives us a really old answer: the hero's journey. And the path means you have to willingly go out and face that dragon of the unknown. Yeah, the exact thing you're probably trying to avoid. By choosing to face that struggle, that's how you find the treasure, which is wisdom. Then you bring that wisdom back to make your own life better, and in doing so, you make the world better too.
And this really gets us to the heart of this first map. Meaning in life isn't about finding happiness, it's something that happens when you take on responsibility. The source material talks about people like Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I mean, here's a guy in the absolute horror of a Soviet prison camp. He found meaning not by blaming the system, but by looking inward and asking how he himself contributed to the disaster, and then taking on the weight of that truth.
So, to wrap up this first map, the way forward is all about you. It's super personal. Everything on this list points to one core idea. Sort yourself out first. Aim for the best you can imagine, tell the truth, and take real responsibility for the little bit of chaos you can actually control. The idea is, by doing that, you become strong enough to handle life's big tragedies and actually be a force for good. Okay, let's switch gears completely. Now we're going to look at our second map, and it paints a very, very different picture. In this view, suffering isn't just a part of life you have to deal with. No, this map says the source of our problems is an actual, organized group of people out there in the world. This quote really cuts to the core of this second map's whole premise. It's saying that what happens in the world, well, it's not random. It's being dictated by a very small group of people at the very top. The source material we're pulling from calls this group the cult and claims it's secretly manipulating everything for its own gain.
And here's the structure of control that this worldview lays out. You've got this pyramid. Right at the very top, there's a hidden elite that allegedly calls all the shots. Then, below them, you have the institutions we all see, governments, the media, and they're the ones who supposedly enforce the agenda. And down at the bottom, that's everybody else, the general population, who are kept in line on purpose, through fear and by being made dependent.
So how is this control supposedly kept in place? Well, according to this map, it's all very systematic. This list here shows the playbook. First, you create a crisis to make everyone afraid. Then, you use a controlled media to blast out one single story about it. And finally,
You shut down anyone who disagrees. The key here, in this view, isn't really controlling events themselves. It's about controlling how people perceive those events.
So this map looks at recent history and sees a deliberate plan, not just a bunch of random things happening. The source frames the 2009 swine flu thing as just a practice run. The main show, according to this view, was the COVID-19 pandemic. It's seen as the key move towards building a global system of digital ID, surveillance, and control, what's sometimes called the Great Reset.
So what's the solution that this map offers? Well, it's not about doing work on yourself. It's about a mass awakening. Like the quote says, the only way out is for a whole lot of people to see through the so-called lies and then just refuse to go along with it. The power, this map argues, isn't an individual responsibility for your own life, but in a huge collective resistance.
Okay, so we have two really different maps of reality. To see how different they are, let's put them to the test. Let's see how each one would explain the same major global crisis. We'll use the recent pandemic as our case study.
And wow, the difference is just night and day. Map 1 looks at the pandemic and sees a genuine encounter with chaos. Nature showing its destructive side. It sees it as a test of our courage, our character, our responsibility. But Map 2 looks at the exact same event and calls it a planned hoax, a strategic move by a global elite to push their agenda for total control forward.
So from the perspective of Map 1, the real danger in a crisis like that isn't even the virus. It's giving in to that psychological hell of anger and resentment. As this quote suggests, the most important battle is the one against your own character falling apart when things get really hard.
For Map 2, though, the danger is completely on the outside. This quote basically argues the whole alleged plot depended on one thing and one thing only: total control of information. The idea is that if people were allowed to hear dissenting views, the hoax would have been obvious. So the fight here isn't internal at all. It's a war for control over what people are allowed to hear and believe.
So we've got two maps, and they create two completely different realities out of the exact same events. And this brings us to the really big idea from our sources, just how powerful the stories we choose to believe really are. When you boil it all down, these two maps force us to ask a really basic question. Where do we find the source of evil in the world? Is suffering just a fundamental part of life that we each have to face with courage? Or is it a manufactured plot, a system of oppression that we all need to expose and fight back against together?
One of our sources makes a really deep point here. It says the world isn't just a collection of things, it's a stage for action. And what that means is, the map you use to see the world doesn't just describe your reality, it actually creates your reality, because it tells you what's important, what's a threat, and what you need to do about it.
Now, this quote brings up something fascinating. A point that, oddly enough, kind of links both worldviews. It's a direct challenge to each of us, to our own conscience. It suggests that how we react to the small moral tests in our lives is what prepares us, or fails to prepare us, for the really big ones. So whether the bad guy is your own inner weakness or some external tyrant, the strength of your own character ends up being the thing that matters most. So here it is, the ultimate takeaway. The maps we use to find our way through life don't just explain the world, they actually create it for us. They shape what we see, what we do, and who we become. They tell us who the hero is, who the villain is, and what battle we're supposed to be fighting. So the final question isn't really which map is the right one. The real question is, what map are you using to build your world?